you, everybody. So just a heads up before we start. So my hair and the humidity, probably over the course of the 40 minutes, it'll expand. So that'll be something fun to watch. We should make a drinking game out of how big my hair is going to get before this is over. But Adam, I'm so happy to talk to you. I really enjoyed reading your book. So many takeaways for me. And if we could first start, if you would define self-possession. And then why is it difficult to maintain and easy to misinterpret?
Well, so self-possession, I distinguish between self-confidence and self-possession. So self-confidence would be competence, feeling yourself able in a particular domain. So let's take the example of pull-ups. Doing a hard training session, setting a world record. It's something you get used to. You feel like you're good at it. I'm confident when I walk into the gym that I know what to do. Self-possession, I mean something broader, more expansive, more having to do with the sense of self you're able to maintain and cultivate throughout life's adversities. So let's say when you get injured suddenly, unexpected difficulty, challenge, disaster even, how do you respond? How are you able to pull yourself together? And one example I used in the book, how many people have seen the show Mad Men? Yeah, I love the show. It's a popular show. So Don Draper, I think, is a really good example of this contrast. So he has immense poise when he's making a sales pitch, and he's very compelling, he's reliable. He has a lot of self-confidence. But what the show quite masterfully depicts, I think, is that he lacks self-possession in a fundamental sense, which is depicted in the free fall image of him as the credits are rolling, that when he leaves the bright lights of Madison Avenue, his life kind of spirals in this free fall of failed attempts at personal renewal, difficulty maintaining relationships, and his life is in shambles, except for in that one moment when he's confident and able. So that's the contrast that I'm trying to get at.
So if you could explain the difference, if there is a difference between being self-possessed and self-obsessed.
Right. So I see self-possession as very much requiring actually a connection to other people. And this is why I discuss it, and I'm sure we'll get to friendship down the road, but I'd like to say from the outset, I don't see self-possession as a kind of individual power of the will or a self-obsession, where I'm just focused on, let's say, my image, what I might put on social media or something like that. I actually think that can be a form of dispossession. So what I'm envisioning is being able to confront life's difficulties in the company of others. And I think friendship is very integral to self-possession because it's our friends who often call us back to ourselves in moments of self-doubt, dispersal.
So fill in this blank for me. This book would help someone in search of what?
I think it answers to a fundamental difficulty of life, which is the more we accomplish, we think we're going to find happiness in meeting that goal, attaining that milestone. It could be setting a record, it could be writing a book, it could be making some change in the world that we fought long and hard to achieve, but there's an experience of emptiness even when you succeed. So often there's an anxiety that accompanies looking ahead to the goal, am I going to achieve it or not? And that pulls us out of the present. We're always looking ahead, but then there's also a kind of emptiness when we do achieve the goal and we ask ourselves, well, what now? What's the next hill to climb, so that we're stuck in this cycle of achievement and emptiness? And so the book is trying to respond to that and to articulate a way of being that's lasting, a happiness that's lasting, that has to do with action that's intrinsically fulfilling in the moment, that doesn't require looking ahead to some future goal or state of the world to be justified and worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. So I pulled a couple of excerpts that I want to share. And here's one. It says, the path to happiness is through the greatness of soul, which is between the extreme of vanity on one hand and meekness on the other, between the extreme of vanity on one hand and meekness on the other.
Well, let's think of an example. So in the book, I use Muhammad Ali. Now, he was known for his braggadocio, and you might say at moments it was excessive and tended toward a kind of arrogance. But I think there was a different dimension to it as well, that in the face of all these naysayers, especially when he was coming up, who said he's never going to beat Sonny Liston, and then at the end of his career too with George Foreman, he's never going to win. George Foreman's too strong, he's too powerful. Ali's been out for 3 years, he's washed up. All of this criticism and this doubt, and he still said, "No, I'm the world's greatest." And he had this belief, and he said it after he beat Sonny Liston for the first time. He looked at the report. He said, "Say I'm the world's greatest." And from a certain perspective, you could say, well, it was a little bit arrogant, but he backed it up, and it reflected belief in himself and in his work, in what he was doing, in the style of boxing that he was trying to bring to be, which wouldn't just be these two heavyweights slugging it out, but with grace, dancing, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, this new way of bringing the sport out that he committed himself to. And he really thought there was something great there. So were he to have said, just kind of acceded to the naysayers and the reporters, there would have been a kind of meekness. So he walked that middle ground, I think, in quite a beautiful way. Now,
Well, it takes a bit of that to succeed. Not necessarily arrogance, but a full-throated belief in yourself. But I also believe that you should have that meekness as well. So I think that's what that stood out to me. Here's another passage. A person of great soul is in the habit of forgetting and overlooking the wrongs he has suffered. Aristotle thus presents an image of someone who is gentle, but no pushover, someone who does not need the validation of others, and who therefore floats above the pettiness to which human life is prone. So again, how can one really achieve this state of being that you're describing there?
well, one other character that I look at, this is more philosophical, historical figure, quite distant from Muhammad Ali, and I think perhaps best captures this, is Socrates. So this tremendous resoluteness. So Socrates was brought up on charges for corrupting the youth of Athens, and impiety, because he taught Athenians and others to question things, to question the being of the Olympian gods, for example, and the conventions that prevailed in the society. But he believed that through philosophy, through discussion with others on the most important topics, you become better and gain self-knowledge. So his commitment to philosophy and the pursuit of the truth gave him this tremendous resoluteness, bravery, and he didn't live in the eyes of other people precisely because he was concerned with the truth. So he wasn't prone to, maybe I'll look dumb, the orators of his day, because they were concerned with convincing a third party in the law courts that they were right, and staked their life on the ability to do so, but had no intrinsic standard of truth, were very easily prone to frustration, anger, indignation, and Socrates wasn't. But at the same time, getting back to your point about what you described as meekness, he had a great humility because he attempted to find in others some glimmer of insight, some glimmer of the truth, and attempted to understand others as misguided, not wholly different from himself, even when they were adversarial, that nobody's entirely mistaken in their views, and that the trick is to find some common ground, even if it's not apparent, and to work with that, and that there's immense personal strength that comes from doing so.
And to that point of personal strength and breaking it down for takeaways for us here, I do think, and you tell me as a philosopher, as an educator, I do think that the more that you are comfortable in your skin, as that trite phrase goes, but it's very important. The more assured of yourself that you are, the more you're able to walk in humility.
Yes.
So how do we get there if we don't understand how to do so?
Well, I think, so for example, this Athenian orator, Callicles, attacks Socrates. He says, you spend all your time doing philosophy, thinking about these highfalutin things, but you don't know what really makes human beings tick. And you can't defend yourself if you were brought up on charges in the law courts because you don't know how to persuade people. You don't know about human pleasure. You deny yourself pleasure by thinking all the time. And so Socrates says to him, okay, and Callicles concludes by saying, you're like a child. You know, it's okay for children to question things and to refute ideas, but when you're a man, you shouldn't do that anymore. You should move on to better things. And Socrates says to Callicles, well, do you really think that that pleasure in using rhetoric to get what you want is the highest thing in life? I mean, haven't you ever seen a child taking pleasure in acting foolishly? And Callicles says, yes, of course I have. And he can't deny that because he just accused Socrates of acting like a child, yet quite visibly taking pleasure in the activity of philosophy. So he's working from within Callicles' own perspective and finding internal contradictions that sort of meet him where he is, but that also at the same time challenge him. So Callicles then has to admit, yes, of course, I've seen a child taking pleasure in things that are foolish. And Socrates says, well, then there must be something different here. The good and the pleasant are not identical. And that takes Callicles aback. So at first you have this confrontation, this combat, but you see that Socrates, motivated by his faith in eliciting a truth through dialogue. Now, truth not in some abstract sense, but truth that is from person to person, that is ad hominem, not in a negative sense, but attempting to enter the perspective of somebody and bring them along just a little bit. And I think that's really key. It's missing from many forms of our relationships today, and well, I think quite obviously in politics.
Yes, definitely. One takeaway from that, again, I want to take it and apply it to what I want us to be able to walk out of here and, just instantly apply it to our lives. And I like the idea of making sure that we do continue questioning and asking questions and having fun and really working towards grabbing onto levity any moment in any moment of your day, your life, your week that you can. But I do want to move on to the next question, and that is, how crucial is the path, the journey, while searching for the point of happiness?
So part of my point is that the journey is everything in a sense. So we may have a goal, and there's nothing wrong with goals. A life without goals would probably be impossible to live. We have to put a roof over our head. We have to provide for necessities, but also goals are exciting. A record, an accomplishment, whatever it may be, and it motivates you. But it's easy to get hung up on your goals and lose sight of the path. And we often say to ourselves, well, it's not about the end, it's about the journey. It's not the destination. Mm-hmm. So another emblematic figure I like to think about here to understand how we can ourselves come to appreciate the journey is Odysseus. So he's this great adventurer. He has all the whole story that Homer gives us is about his trial at sea. So he's accomplished something back in Troy. You remember all the Trojan horse, this stunning victory against the Trojans that Odysseus, being so clever, devised. So an amazing accomplishment there, and now he wants to return home, a future goal. Mm-hmm. One thing accomplished, one thing ahead of him. And the entire book is about neither of those things. I mean, the homecoming, yes, finally at the end, but most of it is in the middle when he's facing these sudden trials and tribulations at seas. Scylla and Charybdis, the call of the sirens, where he ties himself to the mast and has to steer himself past. So I think what this illustrates is that the home, Ithaca, is actually constituted by the journey. It's not just that he would rather skip all of these steps. Like let's say he had GPS. What if Odysseus had GPS navigation, could go home straight, easy, no difficulty? The return wouldn't be the same. And it's the journey and the meaning of the journey and what that says about your commitment to the destination that really matters. So I think if we adopt that perspective more and step back to ask ourselves in the pursuit of our goals, well, what is it that we learn of ourselves along the way? The friends that we make, the new experiences we encounter and integrate within ourselves.
Yeah, it's character building as well.
Yeah.
So here's another excerpt here. It says, more powerful than rhetoric is philosophy, which is concerned with striking the proper balance between protecting oneself and taking a stance. Interpret that for us.
So Socrates could have protected himself. Plato makes this pretty clear in his dialogue so he was sentenced to death. But what would typically happen actually in the law courts of his day in these cases is that he could kind of say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, and repent, I won't do it again. And Socrates had this option, and he didn't take it because he believed in philosophy. He wanted philosophy to survive among his students. Plato, who wrote about Socrates and how we know about Socrates primarily, was one of his students. So taking a stand, so he said, no, I will never give up philosophy. So he kind of sticks his thumb in the eye of the Athenian jury. He could have gotten off and saved himself, saved his life, but he chose not to. And I think what the story illustrates is that there are limits to the value of self-preservation and this ideal of living a long life, which is very current these days, especially, you hear about these life extension enthusiasts today. I've been reading about them and intrigued by them. But also I find the movement kind of creepy.
Why?
Well, it goes back to this tension between a meaningful life and a life that is safe and secure. And I'm not saying that a meaningful life requires risking death at every turn or anything like that, but what I am saying is that there are certain things in life that matter to us, that motivate us in the moment, that pull us in, and that are so urgent in their meaning to our lives that we are kind of taken out of the familiar attitude of looking ahead and wanting to extend things.
So while you were explaining that, what came to my mind in terms of the extension of life, it's kind of like someone who will go hiking, someone who will go kayaking, who will go whitewater rafting, who will do all of these exciting, well, I'm not going to do that because I just, so the person who is almost too safe because they're trying to preserve their life, they're actually not living.
Well, there's this guy I've been reading about recently named Brian Johnson. Has anyone heard of him? Brian Johnson?
This gentleman has.
Yeah, so a couple of hands. And he's kind of the quintessence of this life extension movement. He has this motto, don't die. He has t-shirts, don't die. It's a black t-shirt with white print, don't die.
Okay.
And his entire life is organized around maximizing his health. He claims to be the healthiest person in existence. He's 47 years old, and he claims, I don't know, he's like an 18-year-old biologically or two. I don't know if it's true, but the cost of that is immense. If you look at, and he's quite open about this and actually valorizes it. He lives his entire life by an algorithm that tells him what to do when, because he thinks it can hold him accountable, basically make him live healthier than he could on his own when he's trying to reach into the cookie jar. I don't know, it sends off some alarm bell saying don't do it.
It starts mooing. Moo, because you'll become like a cow if you order the cookies. I'm just saying.
Yeah, he doesn't any longer expose himself to sunlight. So you take it.
It's extreme. It's extreme, and that's not living. And I get it. There's certain things that we all do and practice to try to stay healthy, because health is everything. But at the end of the day, we don't know what biological cards we've been dealt. I mean, you have people who are brilliant minds, and then towards the end, the mind leaves them, unfortunately. So, it kind of goes back to this whole idea as you're talking about happiness in action. So, the question now is happiness an absolute or a string of blissful moments and memories?
Well, I try to articulate a sense of happiness that maybe is close actually to what you're saying as absolute. Though by absolute, I don't want to suggest that it's just a one size fits all for everybody, as if there was one absolute definition. But I think there's a kind of eternity is the word I would use, in contrast to one pleasure after the next, where there are certain moments in our lives that but that we use to reignite the past, and so that we can come to view our lives as in a sort of circular way, but that never returns to the same point. So you could think of it as a kind of gyre rather than a circle, that the moments stay with us, but they stay with us only to the extent that we make the effort, as you were saying, to remember, to recount, but also to draw upon them for motivation now in confronting a new difficulty that we couldn't possibly have foreseen of back then. And I think there is a kind of eternity to this, in the sense that it leads one to view one's life not as just expending itself in a sequence of moments, one thing after the next, and gradually you grow old and forget everything that happened earlier and focus on whatever else is lying ahead. But you can, and we do have the experience of holding on to things. Some things from our earliest memories are much more powerful than what happened a couple of weeks ago. So it isn't just about some biological function of our memory. It's about the meaning that we hold on to and carry forward.
Sure. I understand that for sure. But I feel you mentioned earlier, you talked about politics, and this conversation is not about politics, but because of the state of politics right now, it has many of us kind of struggling to find our equilibrium, and so in happiness could seem fleeting in the face of all of it. So what do we do?
Well, as far as concrete advice, I would say that we have to start close to us. It's very easy to become cynical and dejected and feel a sense of hopelessness. But I think if you start small and look at the things in your everyday life that motivate you, that give you strength, your friends, getting back to the theme of friendship, people in whose company you've learned something of yourself and who are there for you in confronting things great and small. So it could be your dissatisfaction with the state of the nation and politics, or it could be something much more particular and local, some disappointment, a breakup, a failure. And your real friends are there to give you perspective, to help talk you through it. And it's those small moments, I think, that give us faith in humanity in a broader sense. So that unless we focus on what's close to us and set ourselves the task of being good friends, because this is very hard to do. I mean, we get caught up in our goals and our career aspirations, and we forget to do something as simple as pick up the phone to call a friend we've been meaning to. It's on the to-do list, but we forget it back to what matters in that way. I think it's easier to then inch outward and have hope in the possibility of greater consensus and community.
Yeah. Two things. In your good friends, don't worry if you haven't spoken to them in 2 months, 2 years even. If they're really your friends and you pick up that phone, it's like, okay, so what were you saying? And it's just a continuation of where you left off, And so don't worry that so much time has passed. Like, I feel bad, I can't call, I haven't talked to her in 5 years, and I have 2 grandchildren and I didn't tell her. It doesn't matter. And then the other thing, when you said, Adam, about starting small and starting local, starting close to yourself, it's everybody who's around you, whether it's in your immediate circle, your family, your friends, people you run into at the grocery store, we all have commonalities. So we have to seek them out, and it's not difficult. It's right there.
It is. It's a beautiful example that you say about the 2 years or whatever that have passed. And that's part of my point about time. I think that's a very profound point that, we say, well, too much time has passed. I've lost my opportunity. Well, no, you haven't. Who said? You don't know how that call reignites something and develops the friendship in a new way that you couldn't have foreseen. So to both be able to draw on the past, yes, this person has been such a good friend, but also to have that transform my relationship in my life, bring new, rebirth to it.
And I'm a firm believer that there are no coincidences. So you may speak to that person, and that person really needed to hear whatever your message that was sent through you to share with that person, or just a laugh.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, thank you, Here's another excerpt from your book. It says, perhaps in the face of failure or in moments of anxious doubt, we wonder if there is more to life than achieving goals. So we wonder if there is more to life than achieving goals, no matter how lofty or noble, though we may jump back into our goal-oriented striving with renewed confidence or turn to something new instead. We can never quite silence the thought that what we fight so hard to attain amounts to little in the greater scheme of things. So if there is a takeaway there for us, what is it?
Perspective, and to recognize the fragility of things conceived simply as achievements, like a box checked. I think about this with records a lot. Records will always be broken, and in a way they're meant to be broken. So in this personal adventure of the pull-ups chase, I've had my record broken 5 different times. Just when I thought it was going to last for a little while, somebody else breaks it. And you realize that the achievement is so fleeting. Even very impressive records like Usain Bolt 9.58, or I believe is what he ran, and it seems that that's untouchable, but someone is going to break it, or might, or worse from the perspective of the goal-oriented life, if you take this broad horizon of time, which I think is one merit of the Stoic way of thinking. I'm critical of the Stoics in some sense, but this idea that if you take a wide enough time frame and look back on history, the particular activities that were valued then aren't valued now, at least many of them aren't. And, who knows 50, 100, 1,000 years from now if anyone's going to care at all about pulling yourself up and lifting your chin till it's over the bar. Kind of absurd when you just consider it as an isolated activity, as a box to check, as a number, as a record. So again, I think this takes us back to what endures. If the accomplishment is fleeting, what lasts? And there are things that last, and the very fact that we can think about what it means to be a good friend, to read what he said about friendship and have that resonate with us today, indicates a kind of persistence that isn't vulnerable to corrosion or to obsolescence in the same way as a particular achievement is. Aristotle, I'm sure, would have something to say, and in some sense appreciate the struggle, the path to the pull-ups, even if he thought a pull-up itself was kind of a ridiculous thing.
I'm certainly not going to say a pull-up is a ridiculous thing. But I do want to know how that box came to be, that particular box, that goal that you wanted to achieve. And kind of like, how did that start, and how there has to be some sort of physical charge too when you're doing it. It makes you feel good, it releases your anxieties or stress, I don't know.
It does. So how I got into it. I was always really into sports. So when I was in high school, I played a lot of baseball and tennis too, and I wanted to get stronger and faster and to be able to hit because I was always small. I was one of the smallest kids on my team, and I wanted to be strong and throw hard and maybe be able to hit a home run, at least with a metal bat. And so I lifted weights. I got into it. Then in college, I played JV baseball for a couple of years and stopped, but I still liked working out. It kind of gave me, as you were saying, this thrill. And I didn't at the time quite know how to articulate why I was so into it. I mean, I guess just because people who were athletic, I found impressive and I wanted to be that way, fast, strong. I competed in powerlifting for a couple of years, and eventually I just realized I was pretty good at pull-ups, which I would train kind of as a secondary thing. And then I read about a guy, speak about coincidences in life. So there was a guy just in the Boston area who I read about in the Boston Globe who had just broken a Guinness World Record in pull-ups. This was like 2014, before we had anything more important to write about, just before. And I read this below the fold article on him in the front page. And I said, wow, that's impressive, but I think maybe I could do that. So he had done 25 pull-ups wearing a 40-pound backpack.
Wow.
And that was the first record that I attempted. And I started training with him. I mean, this is, in retrospect, the beautiful thing personally about this story is now we're very close friends. That guy who I just read about in the paper, and I just cold called him. Mm-hmm. I also sent him a video of me doing pull-ups so he wouldn't think I was some crazy guy.
That's great. I love the story.
Yeah.
Do you travel with one of those pull-up bars when you go to hotels? I'm just curious.
Well, I don't travel with the bar, but I bring tape and chalk to put on the hotel bars because they're often very slippery.
So what bar in the hotel are you using? And I don't mean to get sidetracked, but what do you mean? Like you can't use the shower rag?
No, that would come crashing down.
Exactly. So what are you using? Oh, you mean in the gym in the hotel?
In the gym, yeah.
I got it. Okay. I don't know what I was thinking, but okay.
I don't know how they feel about me dirtying it up with the tape. This is a much better grip. Can you leave that on, please? As I say, sure.
I want to ask you because I know you have a family. You have a wife, and how many children do you have?
No children.
No children. No children yet. But how do you, your learned knowledge, your lived knowledge in terms of the pursuit of happiness and how it's an ongoing process, how do you apply that to the success of your relationship?
I think having somebody who supports you, but who thinks along with you and who can, with your best interest in mind, remind you of what really matters to you, because I think sometimes we lose sight of ourselves, what our strengths are, what our pitfalls are. And so to have somebody who can be there for you, but also call you to account, I think is fundamental. And I think in friendship, there is always a kind of mutually reinforcing tension because you're two different people, but to have been attracted in the first place, you have to share something very fundamental, but at the same time, this difference can be mutually empowering. So I think to be there for you, to be sympathetic, to be understanding, but also to be critical in the most constructive sense, not in a way that's condemnatory, but pushes you to be better in a sense that is kind of deep down within you, but maybe you've lost it.
I understand that. What though, because your relationship is young, certainly I don't mean this in any kind of demeaning way, but just in terms of when people grow together, sometimes there's a plaque that builds up. And I don't mean a plaque you put on the wall. I mean this corroded hardness. And it's how do you break that to get back to where you're talking about?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And I didn't write about that, Arthel, so I'll have to do, that's my next book.
I mean,
you know what I mean? It's
Yes, so I think that life throws us all sorts of opportunities that, I think part of the reason why things can tend to become so familiar that we lose sight of their meaning is because we ourselves are distracted. And I do think it's a focus on, our career aspirations often can get in the way, I think.
Okay, I mean, I'm talking about people who, we're going to wrap after this, people who are past that point. I mean, we're talking 40 years in, 30 years in, the love is still there, the connection's still there, but that happiness that we're talking about is not floating around them anymore. Is there possible to recapture that?
I think definitely that there is. I'm not sure that I'm able to come up with like a how-to
Sure.
guide, because I see it as something that's very specific. But what I would say, at least from my own experience, is that when you face a difficulty together, that's often the opportunity. And it's in confronting a difficulty, taking it back to the sense of significance. And so I think it does have to do with the confrontation of obstacles. So there has to be something there, but there also has to be hardship and challenge. And life throws that our way, but I think we sometimes wall ourselves off with kind of falling into a pattern of making things easy. And maybe it has to do with that.
No, I think I got something out of what you said. I hope you did in that last answer. Happiness in Action, A Philosopher's Guide to the Good Life. Pick it up. It was really an interesting read. I think there's things that you can take away, which is what I love. And I appreciated the conversation. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.